because I'm going to spend a lot of time with Edgar in the room with the Bach. So anybody that's there wants private demos before or after hours with the Bach, let me know, because we do have a few people that have some experience now, some people with it on order. I'll have a lot of content on that. But I know, Dennis, you had exceptional measurements with yours and some experience. You want to chime in with your early reports on that?
Yeah, maybe I got lucky, or it's one of those things when you build out a room, you think you put things in logical places and then you continue to add stuff and so forth. I think in this room that I have, which is not particularly large, I do have a back wall that's kind of open asymmetrically, so I kind of have a half wall on one side and a large open space. I think it's just one of those things where a lot of it just kind of contributes to it. Again, maybe it's where we put the buds in my ear and so forth. Surprisingly, that was the first measurement we took. So curious if it could even be improved, or of course could always go the other way. But yeah, immediate difference. It's still an absolute pleasure to hear the difference. I think about some things that you've talked about and the way the Bach works in terms of subtraction of sound, and I think a lot of that is really what it is doing, and clarifying the individual channels. I can't say I get a lot of this. Like I have a pretty wide soundstage, I guess, for the room that I have. I think that with your speakers and the walls and so forth, that will all vary. I've got the open baffle pure audio projects, and they're they're fairly tall, so I get that line array, wall of sound as it is. I wouldn't say that I'm getting like cues, say, out at like 9 o'clock and 3 o'clock. It still stays around the speakers, but and it does offer really good depth as well. I'm just amazed also how well written the software is. I mean, it is completely bulletproof on the Mac in terms of the visual tracking, always up and always running, always on. It runs in the background, minimized. And one thing I just wanted to ask you actually, Jason, is Edgar going to be developing some kind of manuals or some kind of tutorials? I mean, it looks like this software, is pretty deep. I've seen some snippets of some other people, I think maybe that have worked in his lab, at least one guy in particular, and he's done some interesting things with actually being able to move instruments back and around and with spatial and so forth. So, I don't know if you're going to be doing anything like that, but at this point, I have this. I feel like this Ferrari in there that I've really been only able to get it out of second gear, and right. I'm curious.
Yeah, so that's a good point. You bring up a few good points, actually. There is a 70-page manual that I can send you a link to. With Bacch4Mac, he likes to walk people through it. And unless you get the Pro Tools and all the other things like the headphone and a lot of the other things with the EQ and stuff, a lot of it's not necessary to get into the weeds on all of that. And some of the things I've featured on my videos aren't even covered in the manual yet. So what I bring to the table helping Edgar is some of my videos will serve as tutorials, quasi manuals for people and helping people. But as you probably noticed, once you get the hang of the basics, it's basically plug and play after that first hour or something of setup. It's not a whole lot of management, but there are so many little nuances and value added things from the measurements that can, if you rerun the measurements, like I've done 50 plus, probably 100 measurements over and over, testing moving room treatment. So there's so many value added things. And that, yeah, you can really turn this into, like you're talking about, Ferrari level usage at a super high level. But at a bare minimum, you know, you're up and running within that first hour, getting those spatial cues that you're talking about. And you bring up a really good point, because one thing that I don't want people to buy the Bacch4Mac or Bach anything, thinking that everything is going to be surround sound now with what they listen to, because it's not like Dolby processing where you're trying to put stuff in different speakers and around you that wasn't natively recorded that way in stereo. What it's basically doing is just removing interaural crosstalk based on whatever measurements, and anything that's mono doesn't get impacted at all. That's one of the brilliancy of the software, and why it doesn't have some of the downsides that people were worried about, is that mono signals, which a lot of vocals are recorded, you know, mono, and then certain bass, you know, mono. So it doesn't impact those at all. So in some recordings, if you don't have those spatial cues at 3 o'clock, 9 o'clock, whatever, you're not going to get it. But as you alluded to, you hit the nail on the head. You do still get some of that layering, that depth that wasn't quite there. Like sometimes I noticed everything is still where I had it before, width-wise, or even between the speakers, but the singer is more in front of the speakers now, and then I can notice 2 feet difference between that. Those little spatial cues are, depending on the recording, what you'll get. Now, of course, if you do the binaurals that he has, then sometimes you can get 3, and that's what he does on some of his demos, is download some recordings that showcase that. And so I would say binaural recordings by Chesky are some of the most fun to listen to.
Yeah.
But the most rewarding to me, and I just keep it on now all the time, is just listening to the tracks that I've always had, and just those subtle layering things just make it more enjoyable.
Have you guys ever heard of Ozone? I was just listening. They've got I think just a couple of albums. They're not even particularly new. I was just listening to one. YouTube guy Gabster had turned me on to it, and wow, like, you know, a lot of xylophones. You get those beautiful decays and that reverberance. You know, that luscious kind of smooth transition among the tones. So I'd say that's probably something that hasn't really been talked about a whole lot about the Bach, is the tonality that it gives you. In my system, I've enjoyed pretty good violins, you know, pretty good piano, but it always felt a little flat in terms of the different tones among the keys. But with the Bach, it really has floored me. I think that's probably the thing personally that I'm noticing, of course, amongst the clarity and Soundstage. The other thing I've noticed that I don't think is talked about a whole lot either is the sense of I don't know how to say it, but peace that it gives you, you know, with the lack of distortion amongst the sounds, kind of, you know, and the crosstalk and so forth. It really does, I think, lower that noise. I don't know, maybe it's not noise floor, but
Right.
I don't know. Do you notice that at all, Jason?
Well, I think what you're talking about is something I've talked about. When you have crosstalk, when you traditionally listen to your system, there's a heavy density to everything in the middle. And even if it's not tonally wrong or bright, it's still dense, and you feel like it's noisier, it's not as clean. When you have the crosstalk removed and the spatial cues are now a little more separated, then it does sound more relaxed or more real, because those subtle things. One of the benefits people don't talk about, Edgar shares with me, is it's not meant to be time domain correction, but the only way to do true time alignment with the speaker is at the listening position with DSP, as Alon had talked about at Magico Tour. And this, as a side benefit, kind of helps give you that. It's part of what's in the algorithm. It's not touted as why you buy it, but it cures a lot of comb filtering, which again is part of tonality, gets all messed up with comb filtering. On the flip side, I'll admit this is one negative of the Bach in general. Actually, it's a positive in a way, but so many recordings that have been done poorly with poor cardioid mic setup, you will now hear the fact that there is comb filtering in the recording, because now that time domain stuff is not just blurred together. So it's very fascinating and interesting. Now, it's never really risen except for that Bubbles recording, which is really an EDM artifact kind of thing. The only recording that I don't like the Bach on is the Bubbles, but you do get now a better sense of how the mics were set up on the piano. Like you can almost sense how everything was mic'd better. Just some spatial cues that make it more interesting to listen to without anything like you're talking about, aggravating you, distortions. And crosstalk really is one of those things that people get used to with floor standards, but then when they listen to headphones that don't have crosstalk, it's one of the things people like. It's so clean, clear, you can have so much detail and nuance. And certainly with my new stacks, that's one of the huge benefits, along with low distortion and that great impulse response.
I got my turntable hooked into the Babyface.
Oh, good. How did that work?
Stellar, absolutely.
That's awesome.
Clean. And what's interesting is it's always on. So it's just it's an input that you don't have to switch to. So I think I haven't tried it, but I think theoretically you could actually stream and play a record at the same time.
That's interesting. I haven't tried that. So that's another good thing. You're the first person I know that's used their turntable with it. And so Doug's going to be another one that's going to do that.
It's great. I mean, and with their with RME software, you can really dial it in. I've got a really light moving coil cartridge that I don't really have a head unit yet for it. So the preamp that I'm using, I don't feel is really bringing it out. So I was hoping to maybe amp that signal up a little bit with the Babyface, and I was able to do it. The problem is that if you if you try to attenuate it too far with the software, I'm getting some clipping. So I don't know how really successful that was working.
Yeah.
But it's completely clean, tight. Actually, and I think it's the actual Babyface itself. What I had noticed, and a thing that people are of course, when they talk about records, they talk about the difference in digital and streaming is the noise that you get on a record, and it seemed to take a lot of that hissing, that noise floor. And I think it really is the Babyface doing that as an interface, filtering that out remarkably well.
It's a pro piece that a lot of musicians and pro audio people swear by.
Yeah, it's wicked. It's definitely, and the whole setup, once it's put together, it is truly set and forget. I mean, it just, you don't even, I have it tucked away. You don't even need to see it.
I was going to ask Dennis too, if, I'm planning on doing much like he does, which is have both analog and digital front ends. And I don't know if he has subs in his system. I've seen that he's got speakers, but I was just kind of wondering, with a more complex setup like that, whether he's able to switch between analog and digital with remote and kind of make it easy. Because one of the things I have with my home setup is trying to keep it simple enough for not just me to use it. They don't listen to a lot of music. If they do, they may stream a little bit on a Roon, but they're not playing anything analog. That's just me. So if that were, going up and flipping a switch on the RME or something like that, I could do that. But I have otherwise kind of a universal remote, and then I do have subs and I do have other things. So I'm trying to imagine like the chain where you'd hook up mini DSP and everything with that together.
Yeah, Mike, there's actually no switching required. So so I have the SHD as well. So I have my Mac a USB directly to the SHD, and then I have my turntable that goes RCA out into phono into the side of the baby face, and then the baby face goes USB to the Mac. And so at that point there, it's all connected. So there isn't any switching back and forth. I have my subs connected to the SHD, just
Right.
like I have my amps.
And
so
you're using the SHD as your DAC as well then, right? So
yes,
you're not
yes.
using an external DAC in it.
Right.
Okay.
Right, exactly. And I messed around with that, and Edgar's like, no, just, he's like, use the clock of the SHD, which again, I think I was very reluctant. I was pretty heavily invested in some nice Denafrip stuff with external clock and DACs and DC digital analog converters and so forth. And he's like, it's like, nah, you use the clock on the SHD, which really is a absolutely phenomenal piece. Edgar agrees. He knows the designer of it, and again, Jason, thank you for giving us some great videos on that. You're super helpful, and it's so there's no switching. So like I was saying earlier, I think I haven't tried it, but I think theoretically you could be streaming, and then you could just drop the needle and it would play the record and streaming at the same time.
Okay. So it's basically like both inputs are hot inputs.
Yes.
I wouldn't necessarily ever need to do that, obviously, but
Right.
it's good to know. And then it would fit into my system pretty easily then, because it's
Right.
basically just upstream of the SHD, and I have that all dialed in. Are you using it with Dirac? Have you
Yeah, I
decided to
am.
play with it? Okay.
Yep.
All right.
Yep.
So that's cool. I would it makes it easier for me to consider the Mac version then for Bach, which I was not necessarily considering. I was considering, going all in on the ADIO, but that's a big one to get by
It
the
is.
budgetary
Yeah.
committee. So,
Yeah, it is.
I will, I have a car I could sell that might
I
fund
know,
it,
right? Or a
but
kidney.
I have two
Excuse
kids
me.
to sell too.
Jason, my time's about up.
Okay, yeah.
I'm gonna have to bow out here. Is there anything else that I can add? Anything that any questions that you may have, or anybody?
Steve, I just wanted to say you were right, in your comments, just to get back to those. I think that really resonated with me in terms of how much more satisfying and I guess how much more mileage you're getting out of your gear through the Bach. It really does up level everything that you have in a very different way. It's very hard to articulate, but I felt the same way about mine. Like I've loved my stuff, but now that I've been listening to it through the Bach, it just has given me absolute confidence that like this is where I want to stay with the gear that and the kit that I have.
I have to say I see it as a real game changer, and as a real fundamental kind of shift in how we experience music from playback systems. And it seems to, I guess I shouldn't say it doesn't matter at all what kind of playback system you have. The ultimate effect is somewhat dependent on that, but it seems to make a lot of the associated gear less critical in that regard, at least in terms of the effect of being immersed in the music and being engaged totally with it. So I'm,
that's been my experience as well.
Yeah, I'm to say I'm impressed is an understatement. It's really kind of spun my head around about what all this means, and I know that ultimately the Bach system, it's an algorithm. It's like a complex filter system that can be employed in various ways if you have a computer running things. And so it's quite possible that we'll see it show up in other forms and down the road. And I think that's all good. I mean, that's as far as I can see, that's nothing but a benefit for everybody.